All right, good morning, everyone. I think we still have a few people coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started with today's LCAP update. And it's been a busy week for many of you. You've had a lot of webinars and Zooms going on, which is why we rescheduled our meeting today. And unfortunately, there were still conflicts, but we hope it helped you participate in some of the meetings that were of interest to you. One of those that was held this week was the CDE LCFF Tuesdays at 2 webinar that focused on the written report to the community, and we'll be following up today with more detail on that topic. At the link on this slide, you'll find the slides from today. You'll also find a link with access with a recording of today's presentation and handouts from today that we'll be discussing throughout the presentation. As always, our team is with us, including Adrian Balcazar, Evan Bartelheim, Amy Tomamatsu, Rachel Garcia, and Jeannie Keys. Also, as you know, you can contact any of us at any time if you have questions. You'll find our individual email addresses as well as the general email address on the last slide. The LCAP contact for your district also sent an email to your superintendent and the LCAP contact within the last week or so, so you should have received that with some updates and an invitation to contact them with questions. All right, let's take a look at today's meeting. So today we're going to take a closer look at the written report to the community and provide you with some suggestions for things you might consider as you're writing the report. As I mentioned on the link on the first slide, there'll be some handouts, and one of those is a document providing you with some things to consider as you write the report. We'll also review information about the format and submission of the report, and we'll share some examples, a sample executive summary for your board for the written report. And finally, we'll have an update on the current requirements for the local indicators. Questions on the next slide. This is the usual. We ask you to type questions in the chat box. We'll respond to them as we can, as time allows, and as we have answers to them, and we'll follow up with a Q&A, and we'll email and post that. So share with us any questions you have, also examples of things that are working that you're doing in your district. So let's take a look at the considerations for the written report. Knowing that you're in the process of developing the report to the community, we wanted to share some things for you to consider as you write it. Or if you've already completed it and you're preparing to take it for approval, you might want to review it with these questions in mind. We've learned that at least one district, we'll back up. We've learned that at least one district has received written communication to their board from the ACLU and other groups regarding concerns about equity issues during the time of school closures. We've included some of the questions they raise in our list of things to consider as you're writing your report. All right. Move ahead. Next slide, the report. So some things to consider as you develop the report. Just some general things here, and we'll look at more in detail in a minute. But first of all, as you develop the report, first you need to consider who's your audience. And the executive order clearly identifies this as a written report to the community. So this is in keeping with the LCFF commitment to transparency. Think about who your audience includes. Of course, it includes board members, but it also includes parents, teachers, site and district administrators, and it also includes advocacy groups. The CDE FAQs state that to the extent practicable, LEAs should seek stakeholder feedback to inform the development of the COVID-19 written report, consistent with the stakeholder engagement process used to develop the annual budget. We highly recommend sharing a draft with stakeholder groups prior to taking it to the board, so any areas of concern are raised and can be addressed prior to those coming up at the board meeting. The goal for the report should be to provide a clear description of the services provided during school closures and how the LEA met its legal obligations during that time. The report should be proactive in responding to potential questions or concerns, and it should be clear, honest, and written in a non-defensive tone. This has been a time of significant changes in how districts have provided services, and this is the district's opportunity to share with the community how the LEA has maintained support for students and ensured equity during this time. The public understands that this has been a challenging time as schools have had to turn on a dime to change their whole instructional program. So be honest about the challenges and how you've attempted to overcome them. The purpose of CDE's recommendation to limit the length of the response is to provide descriptions that are comprehensible and not overwhelming to the public. However, the length and format of the report are totally local decisions. I'm now going to turn it over to Rachel, who's going to walk you through a little bit closer look at the specific prompts.
Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, everyone. So this is a screenshot of the tool we created to support LEAs with the development of the written report to the community. It is being provided as a resource for consideration in developing the LEA's responses. And the tool provides questions to consider when addressing each of the 5 prompts within the written report. The tool can be accessed on the LACO website on our LCAP page, and we've also included the link on the first slide of this PowerPoint, as well as in the chat. And in this section of the presentation, we will be reviewing some of the key considerations included in this tool for each of the 5 prompts in the written report. For all areas of the report, it will be important to consider who will be involved in providing the information for the responses and how the LEA will be prepared to respond to questions about the information shared in the report. It will also be important to anticipate the questions your community may have. So something to think about as you're writing this report is whether the responses to the prompts answer questions or trigger more questions. Next slide, please. There are 2 distinct components that must be addressed within the first prompt, and that includes changes to program offerings and major impacts of school closures on students and families. And the response to this prompt is a broad overview of the changes to program offerings and the impact of school closures, as more detailed information in the specific areas will be addressed in the prompts that follow. And so this slide just goes over some questions to consider when addressing changes to program offerings. And so these are questions that are included within the tool that was mentioned. So some of those questions to consider include what changes were made to programs across the different settings and grade spans, including programs for students with disabilities and IEP services. How did policies and procedures change over the course of school closures, such as grading policies or graduations, board meetings and attendance? And other areas to consider include delivery of core curriculum, access and availability to learning materials, teacher roles and professional development, and coordinating IEP services with multiple providers. Some questions to consider when addressing the major impacts on students and families include, how did the LEA connect with students and families to learn more about the major impacts in order to respond to those needs? What were the unique challenges presented by the LEA's community or demographics? And what were the impacts on special education and required services? Other areas to consider include parents or guardians balancing work from home while also supporting student learning, student access to teachers, specialists, and counselors, as well as students' sense of belonging and connections to friends and supportive adults. Next slide, please. In the second prompt, LEAs must provide a description of how the LEA is meeting the needs of English learners, foster youth, and low-income students. And so some questions to consider when addressing this prompt include, how did the LEA connect with families of English learners, foster youth, and low-income students to identify their specific needs, conditions, and circumstances during school closures? How were additional services offered for these student groups, such as additional materials, targeted support, or tutoring? How has the LEA provided ELD support, including both designated and integrated ELD to support language acquisition? How have families of English learners been engaged in ways to help them understand their children's online instructional needs? And how were the special needs of low-income students assessed, including the degree of support available in the home for instruction and the availability of support materials and resources? What tools or resources has the LEA provided to serve the needs of foster youth? And what steps have been taken to meet the social emotional needs of foster youth? And next slide, I will turn it over to Jeannie now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rachel. The next 3 prompts included in the report to the community address the provision in Executive Order N2620 that created the conditions for continued school funding during school closure. These are continuing distance learning, providing meals in non-congregate settings, and arranging for, to the extent practicable, supervision for students during ordinary school hours. Prompt 3 addresses distance learning. Here, the LEAs will provide a description of the steps they have taken to continue delivering high-quality distance learning opportunities. Some considerations for the LEA are included as questions in the tool for prompt 3. In the response, the LEA might consider addressing how instruction continued and materials used during school closures. An LEA might describe how instruction was delivered, the curriculum in use, and the consistency in the delivery of the curriculum, and articulate the models for elementary and secondary schools. An LEA might consider including in the response how the LEA acquired and distributed technology and materials during school closures, explaining what devices were made available, to whom and how it was determined, who would receive what. The LEA might explain the collaboration with community organizations that has occurred and how this has increased or supported internet access and device access. Additionally, explaining the training and professional development that was provided to teachers, administrators, or other staff, and explaining how the LEA is providing necessary supports for high-need student groups, especially special education students, English learners, and specific student groups in your LEA may really help the community to understand how the LEA is supporting each of these groups to access the distance learning programs. Additionally, it may be helpful for your community to understand how you offered parental support to support home learning. And finally, in your response, the LEA may consider addressing how the distance learning platforms supported providing and addressing the social emotional needs of students in your LEA. And now we'll move on to prompt 4. Thank you. Prompt 4 addresses the steps that have been taken by the LEA to provide school meals while maintaining social distancing practices. In this section, the LEAs may consider explaining their process for distributing meals in these non-congregate settings. This may include describing how the LEA determined the sites and locations where the meal distribution would occur, and if this was limited to certain sites, how this was determined, Additionally, your response might describe the types of meals provided, such as breakfast, breakfast and lunch. Was dinner provided? Some LEAs may have coordinated with sponsoring agencies and community partners to provide meals, fresh fruits and vegetables, snacks to students and families, and including this in your response may help your community to understand what this looked like. If the LEA applied for any of the USDA waivers around meal distribution, the LEA might consider explaining the implications of any of these waivers granted and how this impacted the meal distribution program during school closures. And additionally, the response might describe how staff and volunteer recruitment and training occurred to provide these meals, and what was the data that the district collected to inform the actual number of meals that were provided, and what were the traffic and flow patterns for individuals accessing meals in the LEA. And now we'll go on to prompt 5. Prompt 5 addresses the steps that have been taken by the LEA to arrange for supervision of students during ordinary school hours. The response to this prompt may address services provided by the LEA, may also include services provided by the LEA in partnership with other agencies, and or may include how the LEA coordinated access to services that were provided through other agencies. Some questions to consider include: how has the LEA developed a plan for ensuring that students from all grades served are supervised during school hours? And how the LEA identified the students who might be in unsafe or unsupervised situations during school hours? In the response, the LEA may consider including how the LEA informed families about their options for childcare and supervision. How were families provided with a list of known local programs that remained open for service? Additionally, if the LEA partnered with service providers, how did the LEA partner with these agencies, and how did this partnership connect to families in need of care? And if school sites were used for critical pop-up child care programs for working families in need of care for their children, the LEA may consider including and describing these programs and the locations of these programs in their response. Additionally, the response may address collaboration that occurred between the LEA and other agencies, and may include how the LEA collaborated with their local planning council or other local child care entities to ensure continuity of services to families in need of child care. These questions included in the tool are all considerations for LEAs to reflect on when providing their response to the written report to the community. And now Amy's going to address the format and submission of the report.
Thank you, Jeannie. I hope everyone out there is doing well. And I'm going to go ahead and begin to talk about the format of the report. So for the format, there's no specific required template that must be used for the written report to the community. The requirement is just to address all the areas described in the executive order. These required areas are those that Rachel and Jeannie just addressed in the previous 5 slides. Next slide, please. The CDE released a sample form, which they are calling the COVID-19 Operations Report. Their template is a resource that they've provided, but it's not required that LEAs use this exact template. We wanted to emphasize this point because we know that many of you who work on the LCAP know that the LCAP requires the use of the CDE template. This written report is not an LCAP, and the CDE form is an optional template. Also, the CDE template recommends that responses to each prompt do not exceed 300 words. So to reiterate Bonnie's point from earlier, the length of the response should be adequate to respond fully to the prompt in terms of what your audience, which is your community, needs to know. It's not necessary to restrict the length of your response. Next slide. I'm sorry, could you go back one slide? One more point on this one. This is the CDE template, like I said earlier. The CDE LCAP website, on the right-hand side of that slide, you see a one-page guidance document, which again lists the 5 areas to be included, the timeline for board approval and submission, and the requirement for posting on the LEA's webpage. Okay, next slide. LACO's eLCAP system will provide all LEAs an option to create the report within the system. This system is currently under development, and it is anticipated that users will be able to log on and enter their responses to the 5 prompts on or before May 28th. So our tech services team is anticipating a completion date of May 28th. Any LEA who wishes to complete the written report within the LACO eLCAP system will be able to download their completed report in PDF. You will find a link to the LACO eLCAP system labeled Community Report. For school districts within Los Angeles County who are required to submit their board-adopted written report to the Los Angeles County Office of Education, the eLCAP system will be used for submission of the written report as well. You will be able to submit a PDF, either one that was created here within the LACO eLCAP system, or a PDF copy of the CDE's optional template, or your own locally developed template, since you have those options. Charter schools will submit theirs to their charter authorizer, and if you're listening in today from a different county, you will submit your report to your own county office. Next slide. All LEAs will present their written report at the same board meeting as their annual budget, sometime before July 1st, 2020. The CDE recommends that it be presented as a non-consent item so that it is its own item, not grouped together with other routine items. We are providing this sample executive summary as a resource to you so that it could be hopefully helpful to you in developing your board item. Next slide. And that sample executive summary is also going to be available on our LCAP website. Maybe Evan could post the, oh no, he's presenting. I will post it.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to talk a bit about the local indicators, and I'm worried. My colleagues have set the bar pretty high here. There's very few questions, so I'm sure if I can't get through this without a million questions, I guess I lose the bet. But recently the CDE updated their LCAP FAQ with some clarifying questions and answers related to the local indicators. Then additionally, they had a Tuesdays at 2 this week about the written report, but also included some updates on the local indicators. So we just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on those points. The next slide. So what changed? Well, this is what changed with the executive order, just to kind of review. As we noted previously, Executive Order N5620 waived the requirement that LEAs publicly report the data for the local indicators in conjunction with the adoption of the LCAP, with respect to the review and adoption that would otherwise be required by July 1st, 2020. So in other words, the deadline to review by July 1st is waived because the timeline for the LCAP has been waived. Next slide. So this is directly from the FAQ, however. Are LEAs still expected to collect local indicator data? Yes. LEAs are still required to collect and report the local indicator data based on the standards adopted by the State Board of Education in January 2020. To this end, an LEA must annually measure its progress in meeting the requirements of the relevant LCFF priority, which, as you know, include the basics: teachers, textbooks, facilities, implementation of academic standards, parent and family engagement, school climate, and access to a broad course of study. They must report the results as part of a non-consent item at a regularly scheduled public meeting of the local governing board in conjunction with the adoption of the LCAP, and they must report results to the public through the dashboard utilizing the state board adopted self-reflection tools for each local indicator. The executive order N5620 extended the timeline to report progress on local indicators to December 15th, 2020 to align with the extended LCAP adoption timeline. And the important part to note here is the local indicators are really intended to inform the LCAP adoption, hence the need to present them concurrently. Somebody's unmuted there. I'm not sure what I'm hearing there. Okay, I think we got it. Sorry about that. Next slide, please. The CDE's FAQ went on to note the following. First of all, the executive order did not waive the requirement to report local indicator results through the dashboard. The CDE anticipates that there will be discussion in the legislature regarding the 2020 dashboard and the 2021 LCAP. So there's still conversations going on, and I think there may have been some concern that there is an implication that the dashboard might be waived and people wouldn't be paying attention to the local indicators or think that they were relieved of these duties. But an important note is that, you know, the data that needs to be collected to support the local indicators for the conversation to happen should be ongoing in nature. And so it'd be a real mistake to quit collecting them in anticipation of the legislature waiving the dashboard. LEAs are still expected to report the results to the public through the dashboard by November 1st, 2020. And notably, many LEAs are going to report their local indicator results in the dashboard before their governing boards review the results at the meeting in which the LCAP is adopted. So next slide. So here's a little graphic organizer that the CD provided in their Tuesdays at 2. And it's just noted the timeline will have many LEAs reporting local indicator results in the dashboard by November 1st prior to their presenting to their governing boards and presenting the results at which the LCAP is adopted. And some viewers of the Tuesdays at 2 webinar astutely noted that this timeline runs counter to the current requirement that an LEA report the results of the local indicators to their board prior to uploading to the dashboard as a criteria for receiving MET on the dashboard. So that's for the current dashboard technical guide. Undoubtedly, this is something that will need to be clarified for LEAs, and it's part of that anticipated conversation at the CDE and the legislature, which we just mentioned. So expect to hear more on that or some kind of clarification around that. Next slide, please. So what are some next steps that LEAs should be doing right now with regards to the local indicators? First of all, continue collecting data and when needed, finding alternative sources of data, much of which you might have collected during the school closures, such things as parent and student feedback that you may have collected via surveys that have been sent out is very useful information for informing those self-reflection tools. Secondly, make sure that your dashboard coordinator role is up to date, and there's usually a notification that will be going out. I'm not sure the exact date, but make sure that your dashboard coordinator information is up to date so that when the dashboard is reopened, they'll have access to upload information. Consider sharing your local indicator data with your board prior to the mandatory LCAP adoption presentation. So prior to the postponement of the LCAP, we did have districts and charter schools expressing some concern about just how much data they would have to present as part of the local indicator presentation in conjunction with both the LCAP and the budget adoption. And so one suggestion we've begun making already was to consider taking local indicator data to your board in chunks, perhaps as information items prior to the required action item that you'll do in conjunction with your LCAP approval. We still think this is a good strategy, so give some time to air out the local indicators in a less condensed form when you have all the pressure of the LCAP coming in. In addition, you want to be able to, as far as the timeline goes, upload your local indicator data as of right now to your dashboard by November 1st, 2020. So you want to get that in there. And then finally, you'll report on the progress of your local indicators as noted by no later than December 15th, 2020, in conjunction with your 2021 one-year LCAP. Next slide, please. So, and this is again from the CDE's question and answer, the FAQ. If the fall 2020 dashboard is waived, will LEAs be required to report local indicator results to the public? So as of right now, the answer is they don't know. So the answer depends on the form of possible future legislation or executive action. So it's really unknown at this time. However, as stated earlier, an LEA is required to annually measure its progress in meeting the requirements of the relevant LCFF priority. And notably, it's important to inform the LCAP. The entire intent of the local indicators is to inform the LCAP. So since there is an LCAP required, a one-year LCAP, this information is necessary to provide information to inform those LCFF priority areas within that LCAP. Notably, there are, we definitely would recommend looking at the accountability FAQs for more information, and those, as they change, we'll keep you informed of those. Next slide, please. And onto a different topic. The CDE is hosting a webinar for comprehensive support and improvement schools. Those schools were identified for comprehensive support and improvement. And we just wanted to bring this to your attention if you hadn't heard, if you're not, if you don't belong to one of the listservs. But that presentation, that webinar will be next Wednesday, May 27th at 10 a.m. Please note that if you did receive notification via email, Amy actually caught that there is a discrepancy in terms of the new webinar ID. They updated the webinar ID, but they didn't update the link. So they even sent out a reminder this morning with the wrong link. So make sure you use our link here that's provided here. I'm sure that they're going to send out something else before next Wednesday. But if your district with CSI school or your charter school has been identified for CSI, you definitely want to check that out. Next slide. And finally, just a note on any upcoming meetings as far as the LCAP. We have tentatively scheduled our next LCAP update meeting for Tuesday, June 16th. We've taken a little break to make sure we get more information that's really relevant. We will send out a new Zoom link. We've updated our Zoom information. So look for the new Zoom link coming out to you via email for our LCAP contacts. In addition, we have our standing state and federal program update next Tuesday, May 26th at 1 p.m. So we will also be sending a Zoom link for that meeting as well. So be on the lookout for a new Zoom link for that state and federal programs meeting. And next slide. So as always, we will be open. We will keep the Zoom open for a while if you have additional questions, and make sure you send those in. We will address all your questions. We like to give adequate time to address them, make sure we get qualified answers in there, and we will send the follow-up FAQ out to our listserv, as well as posting the follow-up FAQ on our LCAP page and posting a video link to this presentation within 48 hours. And so we'll keep it open for a few more years. And we thank you for joining us today. And here's all our contact information, our emails. As Bonnie noted earlier, we're always available, even if we're not having an LCAP Zoom meeting. You please do reach out to us with any questions. All our emails are in the slide deck today, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks for joining us today, and take care.
We'll leave the chat open for another few minutes in case you have any additional questions. Please send them in. Thank you.